Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies, protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week. Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences' patented technology protects any application against any attack, with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at signalsciences.com/PSW. Do you need a web application security solution that can improve your detection rate and enable easier remediation? Acunetics has a fully automated solution that can detect and report over 4,500 web vulnerabilities. Fast and scalable, it can scan thousands of pages without interruption, including HTML5, JavaScript, and single-page applications. Acunetics provides accuracy with the lowest false positives by combining black box and white box testing. For more information, visit acunetics.com/securityweekly. Hard-coded credentials can be trouble, but not as much trouble as a vulnerable DevOps environment. If you want protection without the hassle of security slowing you down, CyberArk, the #1 provider in privileged access security, has the solution for you. With CyberArk Conjure, developers can easily secure secrets across any DevOps toolchain or platform, whether your application runs in the cloud or on premises. Eliminate the headaches of managing secrets and try Conjure open source for free with no strings attached. Visit conjure.org/ASW to get started today.
Welcome back, everyone. This is the application security news for the week of October 28th. Still with us, Johnny Christmas, got it right this time, and of course, the illustrious co-host, Paul Asadorian. Guys, where do you want to get started this week? There's plenty of news on there.
Well, I had to write showing us up. Huh? Yeah, this is it. Let's talk about MicroTik routers. I mentioned that earlier in the news last week, I think.
So basically, what ended up happening with these MicroTik routers, and pulling up my notes now as well. So they ended up having a remote code execution vulnerability that was disclosed at DerbyCon 8, I believe, or was talked about at DerbyCon 8 a few weeks ago. Basically, what it ended up being was a Tenable researcher found that CVE 2018-14847 allowed unauthenticated remote code execution for a flaw that had previously been disclosed or talked about, but was basically seen as not remotely exploitable, and so they didn't really deal with it until, of course, they found out, hey, guess what? It is, and now you're screwed. So yeah, that's to kick things off. I don't know, Johnny, do you have any thoughts on this? Have you done any reading on this in your explorations lately?
No, not on this one in particular. But then you can fill me in. Here's my main question whenever I see these router exploits. Can I exploit it from the WAN interface? Can I get an IP and then run an exploit against this to do an RCE? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay.
The answer in this case is
yeah. The answer is almost always no. When you see a lot of these router vulnerabilities come out, is it already requires you to be on the LAN via some other means, and sometimes that is as easy as just guessing
owning your Android phone and then attacking your internal router,
right? Or guessing a crappy router password like everyone has. Putting an exclamation point on the end of your password is not security enhancement. No. And I see that so much. Yeah, but any owned device then connected to the LAN, absolutely that can be exploited. But to have something where now I'm back to the days of running sub 7 and scanning all the Comcast IPs for what's listening on this port and just running that exploit and seeing what goes. That's insane. That's a remote ownage of people's homes.
I like the vigilante aspect. Like someone was out there in another related story that someone was out there just exploiting this flaw and just patching it for everyone.
Yeah, so that's not a new mentality. We were seeing that going on. I want to say most famously with the Mirai botnet.
Even before that, the lionworm? The lionworm.
Yeah, absolutely, the lionworm. And so that's some of these people remain silent on it. There's some people like Chris Roberts, Dragon, who very loudly boasts about his activities in those realms. And sometimes, it's there's nice guys just patching things, and sometimes there's not so nice guys bricking them. But bricking them for the greater good, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Sure.
As they say.
Or their own personal gain. Like, was it the Adobe Flash exploits that were like, hey, we've got an update. It's a fake update, but it's a real update. It actually patches your stuff. but only after it implants a backdoor for crypto mining on your system, then it patches your stuff so no one else can get in.
Yeah, and that was
fun to talk
That was
about.
a weird one. I had to read that one more than once to make sure that I definitely understood that that's the weird roundabout kind of figure 6 thing that was going on in that scenario. It's like, yes, it does. In fact, update your Flash to a patched version. Yep. And as payment for their service, they're asking that you mine some cryptocurrency.
Now, what's interesting is that can actually get you caught, right? Because what if I see things are patched, but I haven't rolled out the patch yet? I'm like, whoa, what's going on? So there was a Cray supercomputer once upon a time in a life long ago that the way the attackers were discovered was...
Was that your first computer? Is that
no,
what you're
it was
saying?
not. I wish. They were super... I mean, it doubles as like a bench in your entryway, right?
Humble bragging. Oh, it was an old Cray.
No. And so they had broke in. They were doing all kinds of stuff, but patching things to make sure that no one else got in, and it was the patching of things that got them caught, not the other behavior, which is interesting.
Interesting. Well, very interesting.
Wouldn't patching also, like, especially in this case, I know that certain routers don't have especially these routers, probably Soho routers, don't have very good logging, but wouldn't that at least give some indication as to who was doing the patching based on the remote authentication to the device? Like, you'd think?
Well, that's if it's a backdoor or not, right?
And it's unauthenticated.
Yeah. True.
So there. So it depends on their logging, and generally what I've found is the cheaper the router, not to disparage MicroTik too much, but the cheaper the router, the less logging is going on in there. Just because logging incurs, a huge resource hit. You need storage.
Yeah, that's true.
How often do the logs roll? If they're rolling every 4 hours, just it's a low flash memory. You might, there might be nothing there. And yeah, it is a big ordeal with forensics on home, Soho routers, is they just don't have those advanced features that forensics needs.
And it's interesting, though, especially with the kind of open router initiative. DDWRT is one that always comes to mind. Is like, if you're using an old router and you want to try and keep the longevity of it a little bit, and maybe even depending on the interfaces on the device, put your logs off to an external hard drive, which is probably super cheap these days compared to way back when.
If your device has the resources to even handle log offloading like that, you're running into just CPU cycle problems even in some of these.
Yeah,
no,
absolutely.
Sure. And then there's, who's doing that? You might. We might.
Right.
But the average MicroTik router owner? No, absolutely not.
Well, and you wonder how much choice, and if they did have a choice, was it based on the recommendation? So, like, bandwidth has grown significantly over the past 10 years, so much so that if you throw a crappy router you're in, it's going to run crappy, and then be like, oh, I'm just going to run what's from the provider rather than buy something off the shelf. Which,
absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know if it necessarily impacts the security, because in either case, you could be getting something pretty crappy.
I have at least seen routers now coming out, even on the cheap end, that are doing auto-updating. There are some vendors that, and Soho vendors that are being pretty good about providing patches, because a lot of them are just running the paid version of DDWRT.
Right.
And so whenever that has a patch come out, it's real easy for the vendor to just quickly QA it and fire it out. And so that's really cool. That's, Asus is one of them that comes to mind that runs DDWRT. And
just, I remember that announcement back then.
Yeah. I've come across a few, like, several-year-old Soho Asus routers that are still receiving updates. I'm like, that's pretty cool.
That's definitely awesome, and it's something that you don't see very often.
Hopefully it will be soon.
I know, right? Speaking of default stuff, did you guys check out the ZDNet article? So it's under the "If you build it, they will come" story number 1 on how China has been hijacking internet backbones or the internet backbone from Western countries.
Is this news? I think this has always been going on, or at least people have been trying. Right?
It's BGP hijacking, but the thing is this story actually does a little bit of investigative research. So basically what they found, and this is actually out of the U.S. Naval War College and Tel Aviv University, as a joint white paper that was released. And so dating back to North America in the early 2000s, point of presence, or POP, are data centers that do nothing more than just reroute traffic. Especially for, between smaller networks. So maybe between Comcast and Verizon, for example.
Yeah, small networks like Comcast and Verizon.
I mean, well, like local data centers, right? So like here in the Northeast, maybe between like Providence and Boston, right? Like something like that. So what they found, though, was there's, I think it was 8 in total. I have to go back and look at the notes here, but there are several of these in the US and 2 in Canada that are owned by China Telecom. And so right around the time that the US signed that agreement with China under President Obama to effectively stop all hacking activities by the Chinese military, to steal intellectual property secrets from US industry and pass it back into Chinese industry, they saw this basically start to just fire up quite a bit. I don't know if did you guys catch anything from this article that stood out to you? There's a number of things that I saw, but I wanted to make sure you guys had a chance to chime in.
I did not see that. Apparently, we don't think it's interesting enough to comment on.
I think we're running into...
John is going to comment on it.
We're running into this problem of just complacency. Because, like you said, we've been seeing this forever. This has been a known thing that, when we see it happen one more time, Paul and I just go, well, yeah, of course that's what's happening. Right. And the complacency, it's pseudo-complacency in that, hopefully we also both operate under this impression that it's going on, and so we watch what we're doing. We have always on VPNs, taking care of a lot of this. But as far as the general public goes, maybe it doesn't apply to them as well, but we're talking about theft, the IP theft, intellectual property theft, and this is a big thing, and it's especially a big thing in the industrial sectors, the sectors that generate our GDP revenue. The companies that make things and invent new things. Like the US government just this year, just very recently, a couple of months ago, named manufacturing to now be critical infrastructure. It's crazy to me that it wasn't before, but that means now we have to have regulatory systems put in place to make sure that manufacturing companies are going through proper security auditing. And so I was just speaking at a conference in Chicago on that. UI Labs is being named the National Center for cybersecurity manufacturing. And I was looking through what all of these manufacturers do as far as cybersecurity goes, and it's effectively nothing. You're worried about China, stealing IP via potentially unencrypted or maybe even decrypting traffic somehow via, backbones. That's so late in the communications pipeline that getting anything out of there is, you have a way smaller of a chance. Whereas just simply infecting manufacturing company computers with rats is so much easier because they're so susceptible, because nobody thinks of their equipment as IT equipment. They don't think of it as being important. And these are, you go down these manufacturing lines and they're all running unpatched Windows machines from forever ago. And these companies have wide open SMB shares on their networks that are hosting what even the people who put the files on the SMB shares don't realize is confidential IP. And so it's super easy to just get into these manufacturing centers and start dumping stuff left and right and figuring out what you got later versus, getting all hot and bothered about, they're listening in on our BGP runs. Like that's crazy, and they shouldn't be. And I'm not saying that they can't gain anything from doing such things. I'm just saying that they have so many more effective, easier ways of stealing our IP, if that's the topic of conversation here, that if we're going to get uppity about something, we need to get uppity about it in the right place to the right people and raise awareness where it needs to be raised. The people who manage those BGP routes, they already know. They're aware of the security implications of their job and what they're doing. The people who are actually working in these manufacturing centers that are working with this intellectual property, your CAD designs, your blueprints, things like that, your trademark, your registered stuff, they don't know security. They know carving equipment out of a block of aluminum in a CNC machine. They've never been trained in security. And the firmware they get for these CNC machines is coming straight out of China. And there's, who's checking that firmware? It's almost nobody. The amount of research being done on, the industrial side for this sort of equipment is minuscule globally. And I've seen this firmware. It's terrible. It's easily reversed and backdoored in many, many cases. It's rarely encrypted. When you go to, let's say you've got, a $60 million CNC machine, to get a firmware update for this thing, those several firmware updates, you go to the sketchiest looking websites you've ever seen in your life, and it's impossible to figure out if you're even getting the right one, and half the time you don't. You got to try 6 times or you brick your $60 million machine.
That sucks.
And so like you can't even use the common sense of like, does this site look sketchy? Maybe don't download anything. That's the right site. And so like just everything that we teach users on the IT side about what to look for security wise just doesn't apply in the industrial space. And that's what's killing us. And it's not like I'm giving away the farm here. China knows that. Everyone knows that. And of course it's not just China. There's far more dangerous, more active threat actors out there than China. So it's kind of funny that we keep just referencing China, because I feel like that draws attention away from the real threats.
Well, not to mention, of course, like we could probably go into the rabbit hole of the electorate and all of that other goodness. I'm not going to touch that.
Yeah, let's get political.
Third not going to touch that third rail now. But what I thought was interesting about this article was that it's the U.S. War College and Tel Aviv University that are coming right out and just calling them out. Right, like most of the time, this sort of thing is kind of done either through like news media outlets, or it's done through kind of back channels, and they never really call out specific companies like China Telecom, for example, directly.
Right.
Nor do they actually like have it come from such sources as the U.S. Naval War College or Tel Aviv University, right? Like that's basically like saying U.S. Army intelligence and I forget what they call the intelligence unit in Israel, but
yeah, and a lot of times you see, especially when it's just the media calling it out, or smaller companies or just less advanced companies, you see them blaming China, and you go, well, it's China IPs.
Yeah,
those are really easy to get your hands on.
Sure.
Whereas when you're dealing like straight up with China Telecom and BGP routes, it's harder to plausibly deny that it's China in this case. And so at least, I don't know, I have mixed feelings about this being true. It's likely true, and that gives me mixed feelings, is what
I have mixed feelings about surveys and survey data.
I knew you were going to touch on that, Paul.
Because how much I like to pick apart a survey. Like, there's nothing better for me in the show where I'm like, it's time to pick apart a survey.
Yeah. I think 63% of all people feel that way.
Yes.
So
and 83% of all statistics are made up or something like that. Isn't that another?
What's your source on that? Was it me?
Yes. Yes. Well, so, and I hate to pick on the vendors, because a lot of times they're vendors that I like Veracode, CA Veracode, which I do like, and I like the people there because I know the people there and I like them. I just hate surveys and data, because
right.
So they produce this survey with all this data, right, that they collected from all like their sensors and everything, and they put together a bunch of statistics, which is all well and good. I'm not questioning that their statistics aren't accurate. That's not what I'm saying. But they talked about the state of software security, in that how often people, or how long people take to fix a flaw. And so there's lots of numbers there, and it looks really fancy. But when you get to the key takeaways, right, they've got 4. Number 1, the speed at which developers fix flaws is directly related to the risks the software creates over time. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
2, with the volume of flaws that some developers face, it's important to prioritize and address them by severity. Okay. Using DevSecOps development methodology makes it possible to fix flaws more quickly. Okay. Developers need to carefully evaluate their use of vulnerable open source components. Apparently that section was written by Captain Obvious, because these are all things
we talk. Say all of these.
I don't need a survey to tell me that these are conclusions that I can draw.
And
is it just me?
This is almost like a clickbait article. Like, it's got all the buzzwords you need, and it conveys no new information.
What I found really weird and interesting in this article, though, just above that section, actually a couple of sections above, under the application security flaw correction rate, in 5 of the 7, let's see here, 5 of the 7 industries, right? So save for healthcare and technology, code quality was one of the top issues. That's interesting to me, especially because healthcare, you'd think that code quality would probably still be an issue. Technology, we all know code quality is an issue there. But that for financial, government and education, manufacturing, infrastructure, and retail, code quality was one of the top problems.
I'm not at all surprised by that. From having spent years as a penetration tester, focusing on a lot of I would say the majority of my clients were healthcare and financial, and then just general, technology, just, IT, you're a pen tester, that's what you come up against. There's so many applications out there that are written by low quality, what are we going to call them? Sweatshops, I guess. Application sweatshops, especially, man, healthcare. How many times, I'm sure everyone watching this show has gone to the doctor, gone to a hospital, snuck around and taken a look at the application they're using, and they go, wow, that just looks janky. Like, the application where you could tell how bad it is and you could tell exactly where to begin exploiting it just based on like what it looks like. Yeah. And they're like, that's written in Visual Basic 6. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's because these healthcare applications, they're written in VB6, speaking off the cuff. But
my question is, how did they measure code quality? Because just code quality, the phrase in and of itself is somewhat subjective.
It's by weight.
Ah. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So they weigh all the code, and then they weigh the bad code versus the good code.
Well,
and that's
no, it's just more code means better quality. That's the bottom line.
I gotcha.
Just the more lines of code means an infinitely smaller
that's my
attack surface.
But that's one of my major issues with the data.
Right.
And I'm sure the report probably has better metrics.
Didn't know.
And I didn't read the actual report. I just read the report on it. So I guess I'm critiquing.
It's right there.
There's a link. There's a link to the report, which I probably have to register to get a copy of.
No, I have. Anyway,
I
didn't know we were going to just question. I mean, if you're going to get down to like that granular of nitpicking on a study,
I probably should read the report.
We shouldn't discuss this at all because you would at least hope that someone like Veracode would have a solid definition of what they consider to be code quality.
I'm sure that's in the report.
One job.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can say overall, even if we're talking relative code quality, the relative code quality of applications I see running on healthcare systems and retail systems like POSs, mm-hmm. Any POS that's still like based on an embedded OS, that software has likely not been updated in 5 to 10 years.
POS takes on multiple meetings there?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Right. Unless they're the ones running on the iPads, and then they're flawless. And so I worked in retail information security for about 5 years, and our point of sale systems ran some ancient, bizarre crap, and that had no updates ever put out for it. And in fact, even before that company,
so I'll tell you how crappy that code is on your point of sale systems.
Yeah.
I used to write code that ended up in retail point of systems.
Oh,
point of sale
no.
systems.
Guys, it was Paul's fault.
I mean, this was back in the 90s, though. I mean,
that's probably.
Yeah.
And you're laughing because they can't be possibly still in production today.
Are we going back to like what was the first program you ever wrote? Did you write it for a POS system in the 90s and it's still running at Best Buy?
Yeah, I used Logo to write.
How many retail stores do you go into and they're still running some green screens?
Oh yeah, well that's what it was actually IBM
I don't actually retail
4690. 4690 was IBM's operating system for point of sale systems. I don't know if you ever crossed paths with that.
I did. I don't want to name the retailer because they're still doing it. But I had a good one and I lost it now.
Damn it.
Next time you're in a police department, next time you get arrested, look at this. Look at the systems they're using. It's still terminal based, mainframe backend, and that hasn't been updated in since 1994 when it was written. It was never updated because a lot of those you paid the company for this software and they gave it to you and that was it.
It was before cloud subscriptions, in other words.
It was before cloud.
Yeah.
It was when nobody had the bandwidth to make cloud usable. You would often pay a company specifically to write this point of sale system software for you, or what booking system for the police department, and you'd get it, and that was it. And if you needed updates to it, if you needed to add functionality, you would have to call this company again and pay them more money to add that functionality. And there was no security patching, there was no security auditing being done in any of this stuff. And so, given how broke municipalities are, and now brick and mortar retailers, you don't see them paying these companies to get any kind of updates done. You don't see them doing security audits. The most you see them is doing internal audits and then trying to write ACLs to just get people from talking to the machines as much as possible. But security's not happening, and yet the software is not going away. You if you spin up a whole new company, they might buy brand new software by today's standards, and then in 20 years, it's going to be discovered to be riddled with holes. But
speaking of software riddled with holes, we've got time for maybe one more story, right? WordPress team, who also presented at DerbyCon, is working to wipe out older versions from existence on the internet. And by wipe out, I don't mean they're rendering their software useless so that it doesn't work anymore. They are making automatic updates extend back further into older versions of WordPress to get them up to date.
Man, that's really cool. And to be fair, WordPress, especially the newer 2-ish major versions of WordPress, 2 to 3 major versions, have been really solid. It's the
PHP is at 7 or greater, right? So like if you're updated on PHP and WordPress, you're in much better shape,
right?
And your plugins aren't complete crap.
And generally, your auto updaters take care of both of those.
Yep.
The plugins have famously been the real problem.
Yeah.
WordPress itself, the core WordPress, has not had the ocean of critical vulnerabilities that it used to in years. They've done a great job.
To address the plugin, the team is working with the most popular WordPress plugins and helping them get their code up to date and more secure. And what they said was, they've got apparently data to back this up, that the other plugins will borrow code heavily from the major plugins, and they've been borrowing now this more secure code, and it's been improving the overall quality of code across the whole plugin infrastructure, which...
That is a fantastic idea.
A good idea. Given the number of plugins that are out there, I question the impact that that's having.
They're up to 9.
It is a step in the right direction, though, right?
Yeah. It's 9 is what they're up to?
Plugins or versions?
No, 9 plugins, I think, exist. So
how many? Yeah, and there's how many millions of plugins out there in any case? At least they're trying. At least they're trying.
They are. They're clearly trying. They're trying much more than should be expected, which is really cool. Developing a means of updating third-party software. That's nuts. That's awesome.
And I was just going to add as well, it's one of those situations where, especially for companies like WordPress, at some point, like end of life really means end of life. And they did talk about, they're looking at possibly limiting that to some degree, of course, because this is putting a huge load on their security team to actually go out and do updates for these other things. But I'm thinking about the plugin infrastructure for just a moment and thinking back to like the early days of writing websites, like, GeoCities or AngelFire or all those good things. I mean, how many times did you steal code off of really cool looking sites as well, right? I'm sure that people are doing the same thing with their plugin environment today.
Absolutely. 100%. I mean, there's so many sites that push that. The reason this really needs to be commended is that WordPress is acknowledging that it has accidentally become part of the internet, like a pillar of the internet. It is a core component of web infrastructure, and they're taking on the moral responsibility that comes with that, even though, well, I mean, I'm sure that was always their hope. What company doesn't want to become a core piece of web infrastructure? But instead of saying like, hey, these security problems aren't our fault, it's all the users, it's all the people who wrote the plugins, there's nothing we can do. They're saying, look, we recognize that, this is sort of our doing. We're going to try to do what we can to correct this. However, be aware it's a massive burden on our security team, and WordPress, isn't $1 trillion a year company.
I mean, they run something like 60% of the internet. And I know that 2 weeks ago, at least when I was on the show last, we were talking about how a majority of the internet, especially WordPress, Drupal, et cetera, run on PHP. I think it's like 5.7 or something, which is going end of life end of this year. So,
bear in mind, end of life doesn't mean that it disappears and stops working. It just means when, the eternal blue equivalent for PHP 5.7 comes out, we've got major panic. And I got to hear about that on CNN.
That much of the internet, that's potentially, that is a whole lot of problems.
What do you think the chances are somebody's just sitting on an O day for that and waiting?
And, really high.
6 to 12 months after 5.7 goes end of life, they drop an O day, and then PHP goes, we don't have time for this. I don't know if you've ever watched the PHP mailing list. It's not 7,000 contributors. It's a very tiny amount, and they're focusing very heavily on current stuff. I would imagine that definitely if some devastating O-Day came out for 5.7, they would go back and figure out something to do about it. But they're going to stop actively looking at 5.7, and that's what's important to know.
Yeah.
But everyone else is not.
Doom and gloom going right into Halloween. Johnny, thanks for joining us on the show. And of course, thank you everyone for joining us this week for another episode of Application Security Weekly. Remember to git, commit, and class.